Right. Good morning, everyone. This is PR with PG second sem. I'm glad to report that I'm feeling slightly mentally healthier today, given that I have slept a refreshing nearly 5 hours. Uh, I apologize for my general level of madness yesterday, which is higher than my average level of madness, which is saying something. But anyway, তো কি বলতে চাইছিলাম is that চলো আমরা একটু পড়াশোনা করি আর um, yeah, so this will be a three-part lecture. I'm going to be very closely reading Barthes' essay on wrestling. Uh, Keep in mind that you have both the preface, which is very short, like 2 pages, and the essay on wrestling, which is maybe 11 pages in your syllabus. তো ওটা তোমাদের নিজে প্লিজ গিয়ে লিবজেন থেকে নামিয়ে দাও বা আমারও আছে, I can send it to you. ঠিক আছে? I encourage you to read the other essays, but I can't compel you. Now, I was going to start this class actually with a series of disclaimers because, I am going to be perhaps a little bit more controversial than I usually am. And that is not because of any desire to, to shock or to sort of gratuitously appall your moral sense, but it is because of the nature of the text that we are doing. So I will issue a couple of disclaimers. Number one, that I will be using a few curse words during this lecture. It's because they're there in the text. Okay, they're there in Barthes. So the more kind of sensitive amongst you or the more pious amongst you may kindly shut your ears whenever I use the B word. Okay, which I will be using. It's there in Barthes' text. B being bastard. He uses the term several times. It's an important concept in the text. All right. And yeah. So I will have to use some expletives. So please sort of excuse my expletives. Also, the term fat, which is a controversial term these days in politically correct discourse, we prefer to use euphemisms. You could say overweight. You could say just healthy. I believe healthy is, healthy is misrepresentative. It's not a correct word to use because unfortunately being overweight is not healthy. All right. So, I mean, I'm completely against body shaming or fat shaming, and I understand that people have different kinds of bodies. That's fine, and your body is beautiful, and that's wonderful. But I'm kind of against this culture of obfuscation to the extent that you call being obese healthy, because obesity is a medical problem to some extent. All right. I mean, some degree of somatic variation is indeed natural, but being excessively kind of overweight is a problem. So again, I will be using the word fat because Barthes uses it and because it saves us a lot of time. But I want to be very, very clear that my use of the word does not imply any kind of moral judgment, does not imply any kind of condemnation of any individual. All right, it's just the simplest way to talk about this particular word and how Barthes uses it. Okay, that. Now, I would like to begin then by doing screen share and talking, in fact, about the very first slide that I have here, not this. Can you see my screen? It will be a bit slow right now because my laptop is hot. Acha, dikhte pachhe ebar?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you can see this. You can see what, I've chosen this background for a good reason. Have you guys ever heard of a product called Kleenex? Kleenex, it's a kind of tissue paper. See, this is more standard in the West. But it's like a box, and you just pull out individual tissue papers. Okay, so this background, I chose it for this particular topic because it struck me as being quite symbolic. Okay, it struck me as having a lot of meaning and being a kind of sign in the way in which Barthes talks about signs. And what does it say? If you saw that background with the, with the pattern of the flowers and the ferns, that box of Kleenex to me seems to suggest certain mythological meanings. That I am natural, I am clean, I am fresh, all right, in harmony with nature. But this involves a kind of obfuscation. This is, in fact, a capitalist obfuscation of the, of what's happening, the papering over, pun intended, of the millions of trees chopped down by corporates in the process of mass producing Kleenex. Okay, there is a whole lot that happens in the process of mass production of any goods that is environmentally harmful. But in fact, with products like this, where you appropriate the the sign of a leaf or a plant, and you use it to mythologize certain statements, to suggest harmony with nature, to suggest naturalness or cleanness. Okay, so I want you to be aware of this. The problem with teaching theory often is that it goes over people's heads and you forget to apply it to your life. And my teaching methodology, as you know, is that, all right, I'll teach at a certain level, but I want you to be able to take something away from this, all right, and to be able to read your lives within within bourgeois culture through the terms that Barthes teaches us to read it through. Okay, so that, and also, things like shape. So that Kleenex box, one thing I notice is that, not only Kleenex, but various products are often gendered. There is a semiotics of shape involved here. You'll often notice shape, color as well. You often notice that men's products are given darker colors, and the shapes you'll see are kind of harder. Okay, I'm going to unmute you guys. Can you hear me? Have you observed this? Women's products will often be kind of softer in shape. The contours will be less rounded, and again, that is mythological. It is suggesting, it is using a kind of semiotics to naturalize certain myths, that men are hard, that women are sensitive. Why? I don't understand. So that was what I'm trying to say, that culture is a process, or culture involves the appropriation of certain uh, signs, and the inscribing of particular meanings which are often arbitrary, in the way that, for instance, gender can be, to some extent, arbitrary. What exactly is it about pink that that denotes women? What exactly, so do you understand what I'm saying? Do you get me? Are you listening to me? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can
Have you
hear you.
noticed how
Yes,
products
sir.
are gendered, in the sense that products, even the same thing, so even our you know say some kind of, no, perfumes at least smell different, but there will be products that are basically the same, but for men you have one, and for women you have another, and it's just,
Body washes.
yeah, okay, body
Body
wash,
washes.
exactly.
Stationery also, like kids stationery, it's blue pens and pink pens and
Exactly,
princesses
absolutely,
and cars and everything.
absolutely.
Even the
And what is,
packaging is different.
Yeah.
exactly, and what is that doing? It is naturalizing the myth of a binary in gender. Okay, it is making us, from the very earliest age, you see, this is how ideology works. It indoctrinates you. From the time that you are a child, you start to think of gender in terms of binaries. All right, so this is why I like doing theory, because it wakes you up. I started with that clip of, that from Zizek, because it's, wake up and see the ways in which you are kind of indoctrinated. All right, and the other thing about that Kleenex box is that, there's a space in the middle, and I that also seemed to me to resonate with how mythology works, because see, mythologies are always, and I'm using it in the Barthesian sense and not in the sense of Ramayana and Mahabharata, but mythologies are always founded on a kind of emptiness at the semiotic level, a kind of a hollowing out, followed by an inscription, an appropriation of blank space. And to explain what I mean, I'll just show you again the screen share, Corey. Screen share. Yeah, okay. Now you should be able to see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now see this, all right? Let me just explain something to you. look at this, to return to our discussion about various kinds of tobacco products yesterday and the ways in which they signify different things. You know, remember I was telling you about second order signification, what Barthes calls second order signification. So he says, and I hope you can see my mouse pointer. Can you see my mouse pointer? People, yeah.
Yes,
Dikhte
Yes.
pacho? Okay, so
Yes.
on the left here, you can see that at the level of the sign, you have a certain sound pattern, Marlboro, which is associated with a thing, with Marlboro cigarettes, all right? So that's the sign Marlboro. But at the level of mythology, what Barthes calls mythology, there's a second order signification where the combined thing, the whole thing is taken as a signifier. So this entire, the sign Marlboro becomes a signifier in second order signification where it signifies debonair, cool, classy. So what happens is that, and this is partly arbitrary. So that is what Barthes is taking from Saussure. When Saussure says that there is an arbitrary link between signifier and signified, Saussure is saying that basically you could have called a cigarette, a bottle or a table, and it would have been the same because there's an arbitrary link there. So what is happening in second order signification is that Marlboro as a sign is being associated with a certain culturally inscribed meaning, all right, which is partly arbitrary. There's nothing inherent about smoking that is either cool or classy or debonair. It's going to kill you, man. It's just not, it's not good. It's suicide. But what culture does is to convince you that smoking Marlboro is cool, classy, and debonair. And on the other hand, BD will have a different kind of meaning. You know, over here you can see, and it's obvious even in the way in which it's packaged. Can you see my mouse pointer?
yes, sir.
Look at this packaging, all right? It's in vernaculars. Firstly, it's in the vernaculars. It's got a picture of an Aam Aadmi. You know, I don't know who that is. Maybe he's the owner of the company, or maybe it's just an ordinary person. But all of this is part of the semiotics of the BD, because so then what happens is this sound BD, okay, it denotes the idea of BD, and the whole thing together, the sign becomes a signifier in a second order signification. And it, you know, to the, you know, when a bourgeois person is smoking a BD, someone who can afford to smoke cigarettes is smoking a BD, then it starts to signify that you are a man of the people, you are, you know, maybe a leftist, or you know what I mean. So, and look at how these things are different. So in the case of Marlboro, the inner message, the hidden meaning is that, you know, consume and move up in life, all right, rise, be enviable, you know. And with the BD, it suggests, on the other hand, consume and resist the system, you know, be a fierce revolutionary. But, you know, to be very cynical, I see both of these as part of the same capitalist dialectic, you know. তোমাদের reading group, I mean, whatever reading camp, I give you Fukuyama. What does Fukuyama say? He says the end of history, that a certain liberal political and economic order is the end point. There won't be any change after this. And you know, one of the part of the reasons why, you know, you could see this is that capitalism has a safety valve internal to its logic, all right? The economy of, and I'm not using economy in the literal sense here, but I'm talking about the way capitalism functions. It seems to absorb resistance as a kind of dialectic within it. So even this thing, okay, it's a kind of safety valve. You know, smoke BDs, resist, and that is mythologized. But you know, to what extent is it actually going to amount to real resistance? I'm very cynical, so maybe that's my own reading, the mythology of the, you know, of the mythologist, as Barth calls it. But you know, think about these things. Think like Che Guevara, all right? Che Guevara, that iconic, you know, that iconic image of Che Guevara. You'll find it everywhere, man. Tomorrow they'll set up some burger company, you know, or some shopping mall with Che Guevara. But so you understand what I'm saying? It no longer does it have any authentic connection with political resistance or communism or anything of the sort. It has been appropriated by bourgeois mass culture. It's everywhere, all right? So anyway, think about these things. Ivar, let's continue. I'm going to minimize you for a moment. Okay, so, and the next thing I'll show you, this is just to arouse your curiosity. I'm not going to explain this now. I'm just going to let you see it. You know, and I've labeled it as what the hash dollar at percentage sign is this. And of course, because, you know, for a good reason, I'll explain in the next slide. But does anyone have any idea what this is?
Is that by any chance an ashtray?
No, not quite. No, you're getting close.
It looks
It's
like it looks like a pot.
yes. Who
Spittoon.
said that? Gloria. Yes.
Gloria.
Exactly. Exactly. It is what in Bangla you call a peakdani. All right. Paner peak phale lokera. It's a spittoon. It's something you spit in.
Spittoon. The spittoon.
It's something you spit into to chuck whatever waste is in your mouth. All right. Now this will become very important in Barthes' analysis of wrestling. You'll see how and why later. But even in this little kind of act of using a euphemism here to replace the curse word with these letters, even that is a kind of, can we analyze that? Let's analyze that for a second. I want to ask you, how is this mythological? How is this mythological? Because you
Because
see,
censorship.
yes, no, let me explain how this works. You see, within language, this percentage sign has a meaning. It's a shape, it's arbitrary in the sense that there's no necessary connection between, percentage as an operation and this, this sign. Or let's look at something even more abstract, like the dollar. I refuse to see how this S shape with a line going through it has any it's not a natural sign. It's not what Saussure calls a natural sign. There's no link between that signifier and the signified money. But what I'm doing is I'm using a kind of second order signification. I'm taking that sign out of its context where this shape indicates money, and I'm putting it into this combination where it's acquiring a new meaning, where it's standing for the curse word, the F word or whatever, any kind of curse word. So you see, that is again what culture does. It takes an existing sign, it divests it of its own context, and it adds a different context to it. All right, it becomes a kind of second order signification. Do you see what I'm doing here? Buste parcho? To some extent, okay, it's all right. Anyway, so think, people, think. Okay, now let's move on. Let's go back into Barth. Eta shob dakhalam tomader how Barth is mythologizing himself. Now I need to stop share here because it's very slow, and I'll just get to that. Move ahead in my PPT. Hey, Baba, what's going on? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, just bear with me because my computer seems to have frozen. Oh no. Can you see my screen?
No.
No. Okay, now I don't know what to do. I'm stuck here. Arey Baba. No, I want to get out of this. How do I close this? Alt F4. Excuse me, what's going on here? All right, people, I'm so sorry. I'm having some technical problems. I seem to be stuck in. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. So, share screen. Share screen. Okay. Now you can see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's do this. World of wrestling. Okay, now I'm going to start by kind of summarizing the key argument, which is basically what Barth is trying to say is that wrestling is similar to ancient Greek theater. All right, that's the kind of basic message. It's much more complicated than that, but this is the essence of the essay. All right. In short, it is an examination of the symbolic and culturally encoded meanings of what Barth calls all-in wrestling, as opposed to competitive wrestling. So he's talking about basically WWE, which we all know is a fake. It's not, it's not real. And I'm not saying anything controversial here. It's a well-established kind of fact that entertainment wrestling is not the same as, for instance, your judo or karate. It's not actually a competitive sport. It's staged, it's scripted. Okay, does anyone here watch wrestling? Because then you could contribute to the conversation. Anyone? In this entire class, there is nobody who has watched wrestling in their lives.
I have watched and
Uh,
Used to.
anyone? This is in our patriarchal
Yes, sir.
society is often gendered as a particularly male thing to watch. So we'll ask guys here, guys, do you watch wrestling? Again, not to suggest that there's anything natural about men watching wrestling or women not watching wrestling. It's just the way culture works in a patriarchal society. But where are the boys in our conversation here?
Sir, I watch.
Okay, who is that?
Meghna.
মেঘনা কোথায় তোমায় দেখতে পাচ্ছি না
Sir, দেখতে পাবেন না।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, okay fine. Where the boys are all sleeping, it seems today they haven't come for class. This is another problem. With the way society works, boys are given a kind of, they're brought up with a sense of entitlement where they're very confident, they think they can just bunk all the time. It's wrong. Where did they go? একটা ছেলে তো ছিল, কোথায় গেল ঐতিহ্য?
স্যার দেখতাম না খুব
স্যার দেয়ার
ওই তো ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডে চুপ করে বসে আছে,
ঐশিক।
চুপ করে বসে আছে
স্যার
এখন।
দেয়ার
লাজ গুটিয়ে চুপ করে বসে আছে। হ্যাঁ
একটু
ঠিক
একটু
আছে।
দেখতাম যে সময়টা রোমান রেঞ্জ ফাইট করতো, বাকি
কোনটা দেখতিস?
রোমান রেঞ্জ যখন ফাইট করতো তখন দেখতাম শুধু।
স্যার আমি জন সিনা যখন ফাইট করতো দেখতাম।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, so then you can contribute to this conversation. আর এখানে ঈশানা না কে বললো হিমেলি, who was it?
Meghna and I've also watched.
Okay,
I
good.
also.
So
So
this
I
should
also
be,
used to watch when Undertaker and Big Show used
Yeah.
to fight.
that's good because I will be referring to Undertaker and Big Show. Anyway, so Barth is talking about all-in wrestling, which is not real wrestling. All-in wrestling, something like WWF, যেটাকে আজকাল WWE বলে, because they have come to admit it. ওটাকে World Wrestling Entertainment বলে because ওরা openly এখন বলছে that দেখো এটা সত্যিকার sport না, it's a kind of entertainment. So a stadium filling spectacular exhibition rather than a sport. This sort of wrestling is, according to Barth, a kind of performance similar to certain forms of theater. Jennifer Lowry says in The World of Wrestling, her essay on it, that like theater, wrestling is based upon a sign system. Each element of wrestling, whether the wrestler's physique or his gestures, indicate an absolute clarity, since the spectator must always understand everything on the spot. Now, just to be clear to me, Dandike, you can see this mask. Now, I can also hear a bird. Is that a real bird? Hello? Is someone walking about in the midst of nature while this class is going on? Do you have a pet bird? Can you please shut the bird up? Can you একটু politely একটু বলো birdটাকে, এই bird একটুখানি একটু এত আওয়াজ। What is the bird so happy about? I don't understand.
Maybe it's ranting, not happy.
Actually, that's true.
That
I'm
people are
presuming
caged.
that's true. Yeah, maybe it's complaining. That's deep. Anyway, I'm going to mute you guys for a bit because this bird is distracting me a lot. So, who is this bird person? This is so complicated, this 21st century classroom. How do I... The bird has shut up. Oh no, it's back. Okay, I'm muting you. Sorry, I can't take this anymore. Mute করে দিলাম. Anyway, okay, chalo, let's make some progress now. So to be very clear, Barth is not talking about any and all theater. He's thinking about ancient Greek theater, and he's talking about a kind of theater in which there isn't very much ambiguity in terms of the roles that actors play. So as you know, in ancient Greek theater, there's a comic mask, there's a tragic mask. So it's clear right from the beginning that this is a tragic character, that this person is going to have a tragic outcome. In fact, therein lies the what you call the dramatic irony. There's always a gap of knowledge, in the sense that Oedipus on stage does not know what's going to happen to him, but the spectator knows. The audience already knows that he is going to suffer his tragic fate, and that's important. We'll see how that's important shortly. Okay, but Barth is thinking then of a specific type of theater. In the theater, the private becomes public. In wrestling, this exhibition of suffering is the very aim of the fight. Like the theater, the public watches wrestling for the great spectacle of suffering, defeat, and justice. As in the theater, wrestling presents man's suffering with all the amplification of tragic mass. So he's talking about how in a particular kind of theater, the roles would be very clear, and you're going in there. If you're thinking about the ancient Greek theory, what Aristotle would say, is the catharsis. You can, of course, you remember our discussion. It could either be read as purgation or purification of pity and fear. But the point is, you go in there, and there isn't much ambiguity in the sense that you know what's going to happen to these people. And according to Barth, the point of this form of theater is to indulge in the spectacle of suffering, defeat, justice, and things like this, and in a sense to be purged of that. All right. So there is a kind of affective utility involved. Okay. which is important to the way in which it is ideological. We'll understand how this is ideological shortly, okay? Moving on. So let's start with the reading. By the way, can you see my screen? Now, Abar, I'm going to unmute you guys, see if the bird is gone, because I need to keep checking that you people are here. Okay, I've unmuted you. Can you? Yeah. Okay. All right. So now one thing I want to say is that I am going to be reading the essay pretty much line by line. So ekhane, in my PPT, when you're seeing a line, it's there in the essay, okay? And I have actually given my explanations in square brackets and in red color, so that it's very clear what the explanation part is and what the essay is, okay? So to continue now. So, Barthes begins by quoting Baudelaire, the grandiloquent truth of gestures on life's great occasions. So he says, the virtue of all in wrestling is that it is the spectacle of excess. Here we find a grandiloquence which must have been that of ancient theaters. And in fact, wrestling is an open-air spectacle. For what makes the circus or the arena what they are is not the sky, a romantic value suited rather to fashionable occasions, it is the drenching and vertical quality of the flood of light. Even hidden in the most squalid Parisian halls, wrestling partakes of the nature of the great solar spectacles, Greek drama and bullfights. In both, a light without shadow generates an emotion without reserve. So all of this may seem a little complicated to you. What he's saying is that even though there may seem to be a difference between the indoor spectacle of wrestling and the outdoor spectacle of light, what they both share in common is a kind of transparency, in the sense that in the outdoor spectacle there would be, light shining straight down, or it would be taking place during the afternoon usually, and all the actions and all the movements and all the kind of expressions that the actors would be carrying out on stage would be very visible and very obvious. All right, similarly in wrestling, you have, it's under floodlights, and the reason for this is that all of the actors, I can call, I can interchangeably use the term wrestler and actor, because Barthes is basically saying that wrestlers are a kind of actor, but all of their expressions, all of their gestures become very obvious and very over the top, all right, excessive and very transparent, okay? So theater and wrestling share excess and grandiloquence. On the right, you can see here, okay? Open air means vertical light, eliminating shadows, thereby eliminating ambiguity. Okay, less ambiguity is implies the unreserved, the open display of emotions. Moving on. Wait. So, there are people who think that wrestling is an ignoble sport. Wrestling is not a sport, it is a spectacle. And it is no more ignoble to attend a wrestled performance of suffering than a performance of the sorrows of Arnolfo or Andromache. Of course, there exists a false wrestling in which the participants unnecessarily go to great lengths to make a show of a fair fight. This is of no interest. True wrestling, wrongly called amateur wrestling, is performed in second-rate halls where the public spontaneously attunes itself to the spectacular nature of the contest. Like the audience at a suburban cinema, the public is completely uninterested in knowing whether the contest is rigged or not, and rightly so. It abandons itself to the primary virtue of the spectacle, which is to abolish all motives and all consequences. What matters is not what it thinks, but what it sees. Okay, so what is Barthes saying here? He's saying, number one, that wrestling is not a sport, it is a spectacle. Why? Because in a sport, there is some uncertainty. A sport is not staged. When you're watching a football match, there's no way you can completely stage it. Cricket it out, there's some degree to which, match fixing kora jay, but in football, it's much, much harder. So it's a real sport, okay? But Barthes is saying that wrestling is not like this. It is a spectacle, it is scripted, and it doesn't even pretend to be kind of unscripted, and it is no more ignoble. And he says it's to think that wrestling is something that is ignoble or bad or kind of in any way what you might call shady is actually not true, because in some sense it is like the theater. It performs a kind of ancient function, all right? So of course there exists a false wrestling. So he's saying that wrestling that pretends to be true is in fact false. Okay, the real wrestling, or the really interesting wrestling, is the one which is staged. True wrestling wrongly called amateur wrestling, is performed in second-rate halls where the public spontaneously attunes itself to the spectacular nature. So what's important is the spectacle of suffering that you see in wrestling. All right, these figures, by the way, he mentions Arnolphe and Andromache are characters from plays by Molière, the French Shakespeare. So what he's saying is that false wrestling pretends to be true or fair. True wrestling is openly fake. It's irrelevant whether or not it is rigged. Why? Because its value is not centered on who will win. Its value is the spectacle. Okay, this is very important for you to understand. You watch a football match, part of the excitement of football match is who is going to win. All right, unless it's something like, I don't know, Hull City versus Manchester United, in which case it's more obvious who will win. But the point is that wrestling, you know, you're not watching it for the question of who will win. Its value, according to Barthes, is more the spectacular display of certain emotions and certain you know, for instance, suffering. All right, the spectacular display of suffering is more important than the outcome. So motives, consequences, thought, all of these are irrelevant. What is relevant is the visual spectacle of suffering. All right, so wrestling does not appeal to the brain. You can see I've used the icon. It appeals to the eye more. All right, the public is completely uninterested in knowing whether it's rigged or not, because its value is not on who will win. The value is the spectacle. All right. So, as I've said to you, my explanatory notes are in red brackets. So this public knows very well the distinction between wrestling and boxing. It knows that boxing is a Jansenist sport based on a demonstration of excellence. I'll explain this. Let me read the whole passage and I'll explain. The public knows very well the distinction between wrestling and boxing. It knows that boxing is a Jansenist sport based on a demonstration of excellence. One can bet on the outcome of a boxing match. With wrestling, it would make no sense. A boxing match is a story which is constructed before the eyes of the spectator. In wrestling, on the contrary, it is each moment which is intelligible, not the passage of time. The spectator is not interested in the rise and fall of fortunes. He expects the transient image of certain passions. Wrestling, therefore, demands an immediate reading of the juxtaposed meanings so that there is no need to connect them. The logical conclusion of the contest does not interest the wrestling fan, while on the contrary, a boxing match always implies a science of the future. In other words, wrestling is a sum of spectacles of which no single one is a function. Each moment imposes the total knowledge of a passion which rises erect and alone, without ever extending to the crowning moment of a result. Now, let me break this down for you. So he's drawing a distinction between boxing and wrestling here. Boxing, he calls it a Jansenist sport. On the top right, you can see my explanation of Jansenism. Jansenism was a Protestant-type heresy within the Roman Catholic Church. It taught, like the most austere Calvinist sects, that human beings were totally dominated by original sin and were so completely predestined to either salvation or damnation that they enjoyed no free will at all. Barthes' use of the word Jansenism is confusing at first. While it may seem that the fixed or predetermined nature of the wrestling... Okay, look, this bird is driving me mad. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, again, mute all of you. Mute all, share screen. Okay, Jansenism, right? So Jansenism is a type of heretical, sect within Roman Catholicism, a Protestant type heresy, which is like the most austere Calvinist sects, suggesting that there is no free will. Basically, I've already explained this to you many times before, that the difference between Catholicism and, at least the more extreme forms of Protestantism is the issue of free will. In Catholicism, there is free will because your actions can determine whether you will be saved or not. You do good deeds and you will be saved. So the destiny of your soul is not predetermined before you're born. Whereas within Calvinism, there is predestination. So God has already decided, God already knows who will be saved and who will not be saved. So your actions have absolutely no consequence on the fate of your soul. All right. So Barthes' use of the word Jansenism is confusing at first. While it may seem that the fixed or predetermined nature of the wrestling match would make wrestling more like Jansenism than boxing, in fact, what Barthes means is that the viewer of the boxing match is in a state of ignorance about the outcome of the match. Similar to someone living in a state of ignorance as to whether God has chosen, sorry, there's a typo there, it should be has rather than as, state of ignorance as to whether God has chosen or predetermined to save or damn his soul. They may then try to demonstrate their excellence in life and read this as a sign that God has chosen them for salvation. Now, this is complicated. Please try to understand what I'm saying. This is complicated. You see, what Barthes means is that the viewer of boxing, when you're watching a boxing match, you are like a Calvinist. Because a Calvinist does not know the outcome of the match, so to speak. A Calvinist is living within radical anxiety. And Max Weber would, of course, link this with capitalism. He would suggest that, the Protestant work ethic leads to capitalism because anxiety about the state of your soul, whether you will be saved or damned, led people to work very hard and to interpret their success in life as a sign that they have been chosen. Okay, it's complicated logic, but that is what happened. Okay. Anyway, so when you are watching boxing, you are like a Jansenist or a Calvinist. You are uncertain about the outcome of the match. Okay. So you're living in a state of ignorance as to whether God has chosen to save or damn your soul. Within Jansenism, when you're watching a boxing match, you don't know who's going to win. Okay. So therefore, it is a real sport. Whereas in within wrestling, there is much less uncertainty as to the outcome. With wrestling, it would make no sense because you know the outcome. Barthes says that wrestling is formulaic, that the hero archetype usually wins. Now, this is one of the criticisms of Barthes, that many of the things he says are perhaps very debatable. To what extent is WWE formulaic? And here let me stop share and get some people to get into the conversation, because you also have to remember that things have changed since Barthes' times. Barthes is writing in the, it's written in the 50s, published in the 60s. He's talking about a particular historical moment in French or in wrestling. I don't know whether wrestling these days is just that formulaic. So can anyone comment? Do you usually see the kind of villainous characters suffering, and or do you feel that it's quite predictable sometimes? Anyone?
Sometimes, because magically someone knows where to pull out the metallic chair from and hit the other person on the head, and then they win. Sometimes.
So sometimes it's predictable.
Sometimes it's predictable. Okay. So I mean, I would say that wrestling has become a little bit more complex. There are narratives now. It's more about these people's histories. What kind of, there's a offstage character. There's a lot happening offstage, right?
Behind
So
the
it's
scenes.
become more and more like Bold and the Beautiful, or like a soap. It's become like a Hindi serial, whatever. It's
They create an onstage persona of themselves.
yeah. So there is a, but anyway, so I would suspect that wrestling has become slightly less formulaic than it was in Barthes' time. All right. Anyway, let me continue with my screen share. So but did you understand my point about the difference between boxing and wrestling, and how one is like Jansenism and the other is not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So a boxing match is a story which is constructed before the eyes of the spectator. So ekhane the narrative is important. Ki hocche, you're excited, you don't know who's going to win. So that narrative is important. In wrestling, on the other hand, more than the narrative, more than the passage of time, what is important is this display of passion. Okay, it's a kind of someone is suffering, and that spectacular moment of suffering is more important than the narrative, which is anyway quite predictable most of the time. The spectator is not interested in the rise and fall of fortunes. He expects the transient image of certain passion. So narrative is less important than spectacular display of passion. Wrestling therefore demands an immediate reading of juxtaposed meanings, so that there is no need to connect them. So that the causality of the situation at this point, he's saying, is, the narrative is less important. Now later in the essay, he will slightly contradict himself. So that's, it's complicated. But anyway, the logical conclusion of the contest does not interest the wrestling fan, while on the contrary, a boxing match always implies a science of the future. So inference is important in boxing. How did this move, this punch, lead to that result? It's about the process, the quote-unquote science of how the match unfolds in a series of connected events. Whereas what's more important in wrestling is merely the display of the emotion rather than the narrative. Okay, in other words, wrestling is a sum of spectacles, one spectacle following after another, of which no one is a function. Each moment imposes a total knowledge of a passion which rises erect and alone. So it is about this triumphant rising up and display of a particular passion, okay, without ever extending to the crowning moment of a result. So the result, the outcome is less important than the moment by moment display of passions, okay. Possible critique: is this true? Do we not care about the narrative of a wrestling match? Very valid critique, okay. Moving on. Oh, my screen is stuck. Why is this? Yeah. Wait. Previous. Next. Okay, so thus the function of the wrestler is not to win. It is to go exactly through the motions which are expected of him. It is said that judo contains a hidden symbolic aspect. Even in the midst of efficiency, its gestures are measured, precise but restricted, drawn accurately but by a stroke without volume. Wrestling, on the contrary, offers excessive gestures, exploited to the limit of their meaning. In judo, a man who is down is hardly down at all. He rolls over, he draws back, he eludes defeat, or if the latter is obvious, he immediately disappears. In wrestling, a man who is down is exaggeratedly so and completely fills the eyes of the spectators with the intolerable spectacle of his powerlessness. All right, so you're getting the basic point, I hope, which is that, look, in a karate match, no one is going to make faces. Okay, you're down, get up, boy, or girl, whatever. The point is not to display your emotions. All right, in judo or in karate, making a great show of your emotions is counterproductive. All right, but not so in wrestling. In wrestling, it's all about that exaggerated. When someone is suffering, he'll make a face. I'm down. So much pain. Tap out, tap out. They'll smack the floor 3 times. That's what happens, okay? Because and funnily enough, they're not actually in that much pain. But yeah.
Then Neymar does it too.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. Neymar does do it. Yeah, some sportsmen are more like actors. Yeah, that's a very interesting point, Shobhana.
But again, I think in football, when players try to act out pain, I think it's most about to get that extra, the penalty or the free kick.
Yeah, this is very interesting point. Very interesting point. Both of you, very good point. Because, you can critique Barthes by saying that even in sports, there is an element of that spectacular display of emotion. And that, in fact, that can be a part of it. That can be a part of it.
Weird emotions like Suarez bites other people.
Yes, Suarez bites. Yeah, I mean, Suarez has a problem. Suarez has a problem. But I don't know. I don't think Suarez's biting people serves much purpose. I mean, you get what I'm saying? It's.
But it is a spectacle.
It is a spectacle. Some people, maybe you watch football for not the outcome or the uncertainty or the excitement, but it's also about the viewer. I'm sure some people watch Cristiano Ronaldo matches because that man is so goddamn beautiful. All right, sorry for cursing, but so that's another interesting point. Sure, there are, one can complicate this binary distinction between sport and performance that Barthes is drawing. Very good, very good. Thank you. So anyway, you've got the point here that the wrestler, it's not so much about outcome, winning, losing. It's about going through the motions that are expected of him. So Barthes keeps saying that is very formulaic. That Jay, who is, there are these villain types, there are these hero types in wrestling. And what wrestling does is to make us believe that villains will suffer and that heroes will win. This is the mythological and ideological function of it. I'll explain that later. But anyway, in judo, there is, its gestures are measured, precise, restricted. If you want to, beat someone in an actual, combat, you don't telegraph your moves. In fact, if you're telegraphing your moves like that, they are going to know. It's going to give the game away. Karate, I don't know much. Does anyone here do karate or judo or something?
I used to.
I used to.
Right. So am I right in saying that it's not about exaggerating money? You don't want to do that, right? It's about, efficient, use your energy efficiently. It's about letting, in many of these martial arts, it's more about letting your opponent make an ass of himself or herself, or rather, letting them, using gravity and using their actions. You know what I mean, right?
Sir, it's mostly because martial arts are mostly focused on self-defense, and wrestling is more like,
Aggressive.
hitting aggressive.
Yes,
stuff.
that's a very good point. Thank you very much. That is a very good point. Wrestling is about aggression. It's about the emotion, and that's what Barthes is saying. It's spectacular. It's theatrical. Whereas these forms of self-defense are functional. They're utilitarian. It's not, if you're getting into a fight on the road, why waste your time? Why telegraph your moves? Just do whatever it takes to win the fight. Anyway, so you've got the point here. So in judo, there are thin lines. If you can think about it like brush strokes, thin brush strokes. In wrestling, there are thick, excessive, spectacular signs. Okay, etc., etc. So in judo, man who's down is hardly down, etc. And in wrestling, it's the intolerable spectacle of the powerlessness of the man who's down that's more important. Now, if we had more time, I would have shown you a little clip of this. But this clip that's there, and I'll send you the PPT. You can watch it. Is the SmackDown, some kind of wrestling thing. I don't know much about wrestling, but there's something called SmackDown apparently. And Itate, you can see these moves that they do. They're also spectacular. Now, I know very little, but Aktate Ache, clothes spin or something where you stick your hand out like this and you go, and you just got to smack the guy down and make a big show of it. So, and you have these finishing moves. There's another one called Tombstone or something like that. But the point is that they are excessive. You don't need to twirl the guy around in the air, and if you want to hurt the fellow, just slap him, or just hurt him, bro. You don't have to do all this. So there is a kind of semiotic excess in the gestures involved in wrestling. Okay. So the function of grandiloquence is indeed the same as that of ancient theatre, whose principal language and props, masks and buskins, concurred in the exaggeratedly visible explanation of a necessity. The gesture of the vanquished wrestler signifying to the world a defeat which, far from disguising, he emphasizes and holds like a pause in music, corresponding to the mask of antiquity meant to signify the tragic mode of the spectacle. In wrestling, as on the stage in antiquity, one is not ashamed of one's suffering. One knows how to cry. One has a liking for tears. So he's talking about the way in which it's about a display of emotion, all right? And this word necessity is important. So exaggeratedly visible explanation of a necessity. Necessity is capitalized. He's almost personifying necessity, similar to the Fates. The Fates are a group of 3 weaving goddesses who assign individual destinies to mortals at birth. In fact, the Fates, as I know it, are in fact the children of another personified being called necessity. But the point is the importance of fate and fatality in Greek tragedy. All right, Greek tragedy is about necessity, what Aristotle calls probability. The audience already knows what's going to happen to Oedipus, right? From the moment you're on the stage, you know that this is a tragic character. He's wearing a tragic mask. You know that this man is going to, end up marrying his mother and killing his father. So there is a sense of necessity, okay? And that is what's also happening in wrestling. Wrestling is trying to make us believe that if you are a villainous type of person, that villains will suffer and the villain will be defeated and the hero will win, all right? That there is a kind of necessity, that there is some kind of moral order to the universe, all right? So it naturalizes the moral order of a kind of historically contingent moment, all right? We are living within a culture that is the result of historical process, and that, we are living in this culture, and there are certain moral, let's just say that what wrestling is doing is it is giving us the sense that there is some kind of moral order, okay? And in this sense, it is similar to the Greek tragedy. I also noticed that in Greek myth and in Greek tragedy, there's often this kind of spectacular excess. So overkill in Greek myths and Greek legends. Dido's death, for instance. Dido threw herself on a pile of, what was her lover's name? Aeneas, I think. Aeneas. I may be wrong. Anyway, so Dido throws herself on a pile of her, the story of Dido is that she is abandoned by her lover, Queen Dido, and she makes a pile of his old clothes and his old things that he's left behind, and she puts a sword on top of this and she jumps on that sword. So it's a kind of, this is called overkill, all right? This is a kind of spectacle of suffering, excessive suffering. And this is necessary. What Greek tragedy is trying to do is that it is trying to firstly purge these feelings, okay, catharsis of fear and pity by an indulgence in them, and secondly to also to reconcile people to fate or necessity, meaning that if you do this wrong thing then you will suffer, okay. So in that sense it's similar to wrestling. um, Each sign in wrestling is therefore endowed with an absolute clarity, since one must always understand everything on the spot. So it's not as it were kind of carry home assignment. It's everything is very clear at any given point. You can see, who the villain is, who the hero is. All right, the suffering is not disguised. The suffering is very obvious. As soon as the adversaries are in the ring, the public is overwhelmed with the obviousness of the roles. As in the theater, each physical type expresses to excess the part which has been assigned to the contestant. So Thorvin, a 50-year-old with an obese and sagging body, whose type of asexual hideousness always inspires feminine nicknames, displays in his flesh the characters of baseness, for his part is to represent what in the classical concept of the salod, the bastard, the key concept of any wrestling match, appears as organically repugnant. So I'll explain. So basically what he's saying, and he's talking about Thorvin, a particular wrestler in his day and age, who was a kind of caricature of a villain. See, Thorvin's body, what he's saying is that in wrestling, your body will indicate the type of character that you are. So according to Barthes, Thorvin's has this obese, sagging kind of, hideous seeming body. And what wrestling does is to mythologize or naturalize a link between that particular type of body and being a villain. Okay, it makes us believe that heroes are lean and muscular, and that villains have a kind of hideous or obese bodies. All right. So that's what we're saying, and it's also kind of heteronormative in that it suggests that a lean, muscular body is masculine, whereas because Thorvin is often given feminine nicknames, some kind of link is being made between having kind of a, less tight body. And it's true that in general, on average, women's bodies hold water more, sort of are more. The fat percentage is slightly higher than the average male body, but the point is that this is it's becoming prescriptive in this through wrestling. This becomes a kind of norm. It's making it seem natural. Okay, so the lean muscular body signifies masculinity, heroism, and sagging body is connected with feminine nicknames, and it's also kind of demonized. All right. So Thorvin, who is the kind of stereotypical bastard, he's a kind of salod bastard, is and here Barthes may be being sarcastic because there is no classical concept, as far as I could tell, of bastard or swine. It's just a French word for swine. He's talking about a kind of type of character within wrestling. Appears as organically repugnant. So we are encouraged to condemn this character, to feel hatred towards him. And this is connected with his body type. So the nausea voluntarily provoked by Thorvin shows, therefore, very extended use of signs. Not only is ugliness used here in order to signify baseness, but in addition, ugliness is wholly gathered into a particularly repulsive quality of matter. The pallid, lacking vigor or intensity, insipid, collapse of dead flesh. The public calls Thorvin la barbac, stinking meat, so that the passionate condemnation of the crowd no longer stems from its judgment, but instead from the very depths of its humors. Here, humors, he means the kind of Galenic model. You already know about this, the four humors. So what happens is that the condemnation is almost somatic, almost bodily. So instead of rationally thinking about whether this person is good, whether their actions deserve your condemnation, whether, instead of your judgment, your hatred of this character being, stemming from an intellectual process or some kind of judgment, it seems to stem from the body itself. Okay, Dekhe you organically you feel as disgusting character. Okay, so and let's think about this, because I think that certain wrestlers. So for instance, if you look at the Undertaker. Okay, the Undertaker. Have you guys heard of this wrestler called the Undertaker? Very famous, kind of classic. Onek bochor
Yes,
aage.
sir.
He's probably dead now, God knows. But everything about the semiology of his body will signify his type. He's a kind of villainous type. He's black. He has long black hair. His eyes are kind of rolled up. He has got some kind of he's often making these kind of hideous gestures. So that's what Barthes is saying, that the body will signify the role. All right, there is no ambiguity in wrestling. It will thereafter let itself be frenetically embroiled in an idea of Thorvin, which will conform entirely with his physical origin. His actions will perfectly correspond to the essential viscosity of his personage. So this is a critique of how a certain body type is linked by our ideology to certain actions. So what the kind of ideological or mythological function of wrestling is to make people think that fat and ugly people are bad. All right. So on the right side, there's more explanation. This is from Jennifer Rich, an introduction to critical theory. In conformity with his somatic sign, his bodily sign, the wrestler's gestures underwrite his role. So even the gestures that he makes will support his role. Thorvin, as Salord or bastard, engages in treachery in the wrestling ring. His status as a bastard, one who is outside the law and society, is confirmed by his outrageously unfair means of fighting. Thorvin functions, and this is why I showed you that peak Dani. Thorvin functions as a site for the production of outrage, a moral spittoon. A spittoon is a metal or earthenware pot, typically having a funnel-shaped top, used for spitting into, so to speak, for the audience to direct its disgust with his actions in particular and what his role represents in general. The Salord's vanquishing, that is the bastard, Thorvin's vanquishing, his comeuppance by the good wrestler, is cathartic for the audience. It reinstates the notion that all is right with the world and that injustice can be rectified by justice. So this is the really important point. This is why wrestling is ideological. This is what it's saying, okay? There is a kind of utility to it. You come in, you see, the real world is complicated. The real world is complicated. There are no heroes and villains. Good and bad is not bipolar. Okay, it's not, it's not polarized. The real world is a complicated place. Okay, but you come in here, and what wrestling does is that it makes you accept, okay, let me put this differently. It creates the illusion that there is justice in the world. You see, and how is this ideological? It serves the status quo. It makes you reconcile with the real world, because for a little while you escape into a world where there is good and evil, where there is justice. So it's like crime fiction. You see, crime fiction performs a kind of function. Why do we read crime fiction? Because crime fiction is cathartic. Crime fiction gives us the illusion that bad, that the murderer will be caught, that bad will be punished. All right. So that is what happens. There is no justice in the world. Capitalist system, according to Barthes and the other Marxists, would, be fundamentally immoral. It is a situation where 1% of the world owns more wealth than 99%. But, that injustice and various other kinds of injustices are, in a sense, purged. Okay, what wrestling does is that you come in here, and for 1 hour, you get the illusion that there are villains and heroes, that the villain will be punished, that justice will defeat injustice. All right. And so therefore Thorvin, this bastard, this kind of villain character, is a kind of spittoon. You go in there, you spit at it's a disgusting fellow. He's so bad. He does all these bad things. You go in there, and all of this pent-up frustration that you have because you're living in an unfair system. You're living in a world which is fundamentally unjust. And all of these frustrations that you have pent up within you are finding a release. Okay, it's a safety valve function, and therefore wrestling is ideological. Do you understand what I'm saying? I put you guys on mute. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay, stop share করলাম। তোমরা বুঝতে পারছো এখন অবধি কি বলছি আমি? I would like some responses. There's complete silence. Unmute all. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
You understand the ideological function. There is no justice in the world. What wrestling does is, for some time, it gives you some sense that there is justice, okay, and thereby it seeks a kind of safe release. It's a safety valve. একটা pressure cooker যখন খুব pressure build up করে যায়, তারপরে that valve, it releases the pressure so that the damn thing doesn't explode. You understand? That is what wrestling and popular culture is doing, according to Barthes. It is preventing the pressure cooker of capitalism from exploding. Okay, I'm going back to my explanation. Share screen. Okay, and we're nearly done. I'll complete in maybe 10-15 minutes. Okay, so that's what we're talking about now. Next. So this is it, okay? This is a character called, again, I'll maybe try to unmute. এখান থেকে unmute করা যায় তা না? Stop video, more, share sound, start recording, pause recording. Anyway, look, this is a character called Fat Bastard, okay? He is a character in Austin Powers, and he's a kind of excessively disgusting. So this is what, this is what Thorvin is like. When you watch, and everything that this character does, Fat Bastard, if you watched Austin Powers, he's disgusting. He leaves some excrement in a pot, and he behaves disgustingly, and he's just in every way disgusting, and that is linked to his body type. Okay, and that is what the villainous character in wrestling does as well. You go in there and you're encouraged to spit on this guy, just vent, direct all your frustrations on this hideous character and get it out of you. Okay, so the hidden message perpetuated by ideology is to sort of spit on, or to channel your frustration towards figures like this, and then all will be fine with the world. Okay, I'm going to again stop here for a moment because I want to know if any of you have watched Austin Powers. Has anyone watched Austin Powers? You know about Austin Powers? It's got Mike Myers in it. He's a comedian. He's got funny buck teeth. He wears spectacles.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Austin
sir.
Powers. Anyway, so you watch. It's quite a funny movie. In Austin Powers, you have this kind of villain called Fat Bastard, who reminds me exactly of this Thorvin, the bastard figure in wrestling. Okay, mute all, screen share. Okay, so that is what we're talking about. It is therefore in the body of the wrestler that we find the first key to the contest. I know from the start that all of Thorvin's actions, his treacheries, cruelties, and acts of cowardice will not fail to measure up to the first image of ignobility he gave me. So there's a kind of first impression that the body of the wrestler creates is the last impression. So he will live up to the type that he is. So his actions will not fail to live up to the first image of ignobility he gave me. So the first impression is essential. Body type is a giveaway. I can trust him to carry out intelligibly and to the last detail all the gestures of a kind of amorphous baseness, and thus to fill to the brim the image of the most repugnant bastard there is, the bastard octopus. Okay, now this is funny. This is Barthes being typically, idiosyncratic in his language use. I'm going to unmute you again because it's just quite funny. You see, Barthes coins this term bastard octopus. And for the life of me, I can't understand why. I've done my research on this extensively, and it seems to be some kind of a neologism or a coinage. And this is again quite typical of French criticism, literary criticism of that particular historical era. There was a fondness for neologisms. So why octopus? I mean, Barthes coins this term, bastard octopus, for this kind of repugnant kind of bastard figure. I don't know why. I mean, I suppose one thing that struck me is that he might be trying to say that the bastard octopus is like a kind of many tentacled villainy, all right, a kind of a tentacular villainy, a kind of all-encompassing, something that wraps itself around you. But again, I don't know. Do any of you have any interpretations? Because I did my research. I cannot find an explanation for why he uses this term octopus. But does that seem logical to you as a kind of multiform, or, kind of many tentacled kind of villainy, right? Does that make some sense? Okay, so that is the best theory that I could formulate for this particular word that he uses. Bastard octopus, an all-encompassing bastard, perhaps. All right, meaning unclear. Barthes would fail in my exam. So if you people write like this, you will not do very well, because we do not encourage this kind of idiosyncratic kind of language use. Okay. Wrestlers therefore have a physique as peremptory. Peremptory means insisting on immediate attention or obedience, especially in a brusquely imperious way. A physique as peremptory as those of the characters of the Commedia dell'arte. Commedia dell'arte on the right side, you can see I've given a kind of footnote. A form of theatre characterized by masked types, which began in Italy in the 16th century. The characters of the Commedia usually represent fixed social types and stock characters such as foolish old men, devious servants, or military officers, full of false bravado. Of course, some of these stock characters, and there are stock characters in many kinds of theatre, even in ancient Greek theatre. In the comedy, you would have the blocking figure. There'd be an elderly man who's a kind of blocking figure. You would have the Senex. You would have, for instance, let me see, what is the term for it? The Aaron, a kind of ironic figure. You would have this braggart soldier, Miles Gloriosus. You would have, for instance, you would have the servant, of course, Plautus. You've done Pot of Gold. Are you doing? Hello? Have you guys done any Plautus? No, that's taught in the undergraduate level.
sir.
Anyway, Medha teaches. So Plautus, you know something about Plautus and Terence, right? You've heard of these playwrights?
Yes, a brief overview of their plays when we were doing Volpone, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, the point is you have this top type of this kind of deceitful servant. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, Barthes is saying that just like Commedia dell'arte, where you have these stock characters, similarly in wrestling you have stock characters. Okay. Wrestlers have and the costumes and the attitudes will tell you the roles that they're going to play. Okay, will tell you the future contents of their part. Just as Pantaloon can never be anything but a ridiculous cuckold, these are types in your Commedia dell'arte. Harlequin, an astute servant, and the Doctor, a stupid pedant. In the same way, a pedant is a kind of excessively scholastic, kind of pseudo-intellectual type of person. Someone who's very bookish in an excessive way. A doctor, a stupid pedant. In the same way, Thorvin will never be anything but an ignoble traitor. Poor Thorvin, yeah. This guy really gets some slack. I want to look this fellow up. The bastard octopus Thorvin. He's gone down in history of wrestling as the kind of paradigmatic example of a villain. So in the same way, Thorvin will never be anything but an ignoble traitor. Raniere is a tall blonde fellow with a limp body and unkempt hair, the moving image of passivity. Mazod, short and arrogant like a cock, that of grotesque conceit. And Orsano, an effeminate teddy boy first seen in a blue and pink dressing gown, that doubly humorous of a vindictive salope or bitch. So basically he's saying that there are these various types, there are these character types in wrestling, and that ওদের costume থেকেই দেখতে পাবে what kind of role they're going to play. All right. Yeah. So these are character types in Commedia dell'arte. As you can see, they are quite kind of, they even in their mannerisms, you can see a kind of excess there, and they're kind of dressed in particular parts. They play particular stock roles. And I would like to suggest what Barthes is suggesting is that even these figures in wrestling, does anyone know who these people are? Pop quiz.
Yes, sir. Hulk Hogan. That red one is Hulk Hogan.
Yes, and the one on the right?
That's Undertaker.
Yes.
Undertaker.
See, I told you he does this thing with his eyes. I don't know if that's some kind of lens that he wears. Are his eyes white all the time, or is he rolling his eyes up?
No, he rolls his eyes.
Rolls his
Rolls his
eyes.
eyes up. So
And
you
he was
see,
brother of Cain.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so each of them have these kind of theatrical personalities, right? They're not, understatement is not part of what they're doing. You get what I'm saying? And this fellow over here, he is also some kind of, he's meant to be a playboy type, right? Basically, that's why,
Mhm.
he's Breath to Hit My Heart. He unfortunately died quite a tragic death. I believe he died in the ring, right? Or was it someone else? Bret Hart? Yeah, actually, someone famously, you guys know? I think it was Bret Hart. Anyway, that
Mhm.
dekhte hobe. But someone, even though it's a fake sport, in the process of doing one of these stunts, they're stuntmen. Let's not disrespect. They're great actors, and secondly, they're doing a physical thing. There's some contact involved. It's done in a way that it doesn't really hurt that much. And অনেক training করতে হয় তো জিমে গিয়ে it's quite funny, it's ironic এত যে lifting করছে এরকম body, to get a body like that you need to eat a huge amount and lift a huge amount, but শেষে they're not really using those muscles. It's that's not really necessary anyway. So do you get what I'm saying? Just there's a kind of semiotic excess. The signifier is not subtle in any way, all right? It's there's a kind of excess at the level of the signifier. Okay, moving on. The physique of the wrestlers therefore constitutes a basic sign, which, like a seed, contains the whole fight. But the seed proliferates, for it is at every turn during the fight, in each new situation, that the body of the wrestler casts to the public the magical entertainment of a temperament which finds its natural expression in a gesture. So what he's meaning here is that creating the essentializing illusion that temperaments and character is transparently expressed by gestures, that the low life will act as a low life. Okay, again, understand this, think about this. This is very, very important. Okay, you see, why is wrestling serving ideology? Okay, what is it doing? It's creating certain illusions that a low life will behave in an obviously low life way. A villain will behave villainously, which is not true. Bad people are the bad people are sometimes they seem so nice in real life. Okay, they'll mess you over. They'll do something terrible. They'll stab you in the back, but they can appear to be the sweetest, nicest person. So real life is complicated, friends. Real life is not simple. There are no heroes and villains. But what wrestling does, and this is where it's ideological, it suggests that there are heroes and villains. Okay, and that your gestures, okay, because the villain will do something bad and excessively bad, and he will signal it, he will telegraph his badness. Okay, so it creates the illusion that one's character is transparently expressed by one's gestures, that the low life will obviously be a low life. So the different strata of meaning throw light on each other and form the most intelligible of spectacles. Wrestling is like a diacritic writing. Above the fundamental meaning of the body, the wrestler arranges comments which are episodic but always opportune and constantly help the reading of the fight by means of gestures, attitudes, and mimicry, which make the intention utterly obvious. Okay, this means that the wrestler's actions must perfectly correspond with the message that has already been given by his body type. So from his body type, from his clothes, you can tell what kind of character he is, and all the actions that he does, okay, will be a kind of additional commentary over and above it. So it's like a diacritical marks. You know what diacritical marks are? Does anyone know what diacritical marks? Anyone? Diacritical marks, I'll show you in the next slide, but যেরকম in the German word Uber, those two dots above the U, okay, that's a diacritical mark. That is something above the ordinary, above the letter, that tells you something about how to pronounce it. Okay, so the U is already a U. The diacritical mark is basically adding to that. Okay.
Sir, to
Yeah.
say
Sir,
that
probably that dot on Uber which you're talking about might be known as umlaut in German, if I'm not wrong,
Okay,
because
okay,
I've heard it from my brother who's there in Germany.
okay. Interesting. What's it called? Unlauten.
Umlaut, umlaut.
Okay, unlaut. Okay, Kohana, you were saying something?
Yeah, I was talking that if what was it? What's it called? Diacritical.
Diacritical marks. Yeah.
Yeah, the diacritical marks. It is even if it is applicable for a letter, it doesn't really make sense to even give that sort of a context to a person just by his attire.
Uh, I mean, it's all, see, the comparison is somewhat valid. What he's saying is that the diacritical mark is simply telling you how to. I mean, it's okay. Look, what he's saying is that the wrestler is already a type, okay, and that his gestures, the kind of actions that he plays, are simply an additional level of meaning, or that doesn't fundamentally change who he is. Okay, so a diacritical mark is a slight nuancing of an already. So the Uber in Uber is still an U, right? But the diacritical
Yeah.
mark just gives you, it adds some nuance to it. Okay, so that's what Barthes is saying about wrestling and the function of one's movements or one's actions or one's gestures in wrestling. It's simply a slightly additional level of nuance or commentary on your already existing stereotypical role. Okay.
Okay.
So sometimes the wrestler triumphs with a repulsive sneer while kneeling on the good sportsman. So the villainous type will always make these villainous gestures. He'll make these faces and act in an excessively repulsive way. Kneeling on the good sportsman. Sometimes he gives the crowd a conceited smile, which forebodes an early revenge. So if he's smiling and he's sort of like, acting very proud, that, you can almost tell that pride comes before a fall. So sometimes pinned to the ground, he hits the floor ostentatiously to make evident to all the intolerable nature of the situation. So it's not like judo. If you're in pain in judo, bro, you're just going to try and get out of that situation. You're not going to make a big display of it. And sometimes he erects a complicated set of signs meant to make the public understand that he legitimately personifies the ever-entertaining image of the grumbler, endlessly confabulating about his displeasure. So all his gestures are ultimately subservient to his type, is what Barthes is saying. So gestures in wrestling as a kind of diacritical mark, a diacritic, also called a diacritical mark, a diacritical point, diacritical sign, or accent, is a glyph added to a letter. The main use of diacritical marks in the Latin script is to change the vowel sounds of the letters to which they are added. So, there's a slight difference. You might be critical of Barthes here because it's not an exact comparison. Because to some extent, a diacritical mark is a change to money. It is it doesn't fundamentally alter the vowel, but it is a slight change than the usual kind of way in which. So Uber is not exactly the normal U, right? So again, so you see the problem with Barthes' language, and we'll discuss this when I discuss some of the criticisms of Barthes that have been leveled at Barthes. He's very fanciful. He's very kind of idiosyncratic in these kinds of comparisons that he makes. So, to what extent are the gestures like diacritical marks? There's some degree of similarity, but there's some difference as well. Okay, let's keep it to this. This is the last slide I'll do today because it's been a long class already. So I omitted some lines here from page 16 because he's just repeating the same point. It is obvious that at such a pitch, it no longer matters whether the passion is genuine or not. What the public wants is the image of passion, not the passion itself. So the public doesn't care. It's about the display of suffering. We merely want to consume an image of passion or suffering. Whether the wrestler is really feeling it or not is irrelevant. There is no more a problem of truth in wrestling than in theater. So in theater, when we go in to watch a play, we don't expect that the actor who's playing Hamlet is actually feeling those emotions, right? We know that he's acting. So, that's what he's saying here about that in wrestling, there is no problem of truth, just like in theater there isn't. In both, what is expected is the intelligible representation of moral situations, which are usually private. This emptying out of interiority to the benefit of its exterior signs, this exhaustion of content by the form, is the very principle of triumphant classical art. Wrestling is and I'll explain. So ignore the red stuff for now. Wrestling is an immediate pantomime, infinitely more efficient than the dramatic pantomime. For the wrestler's gesture needs no anecdote, no decor, in short, no transference, in order to appear true. So let's go back a little bit. What he's saying is that the vessel is more important than what's inside it. Okay, think of Jay-Z or Beyonce or Che Guevara, these larger than life figures. The exteriority, the persona that they present has become iconic and is more important than the interior life. Okay, maybe this is slightly wrong now because see, এখন Instagram or Twitter হয়ে গেছে, so এখন we have access to our celebrities in a way. So I mean, Jay-Z and Beyonce are not the same as Marilyn Monroe in her time, because Marilyn Monroe was iconic in the way that Che Guevara is iconic. Okay, we would not, okay, maybe through newspapers you read a little bit about her private life, but Ajkal, do you agree that what social media has done is it has made the interiority, the actual emotional lives of our celebrities somewhat more accessible, right?
Very, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So things are okay. So maybe Jay-Z is not the best example, but think of Che Guevara. Okay, that image has become more important than, has a greater kind of significance in culture than the content of his life. So that's what so now he's comparing wrestling to miming. Okay, be clear that he's not talking about pantomime. The word pantomime is actually, normally when we use it, we're talking about a particular British, very specific kind of theatrical genre based on, it's a kind of Christmas time family entertainment. So, but he's not using it in that sense. He means mime. Mime, which it's an art form where you have this white painted face and there are these excessive, very obvious gestures that you use, all right? It's a kind of, there's no words in mime. You're just using your expressions to convey certain emotions. So that's what he says. So this is true to some extent, but even mime needs some kind of cultural translation. It has some specific conventions, the meanings of which may not be immediately apparent. Okay, so Mane, what Barthes is saying is that so that there is some degree of okay, let's see. You know how in cartoons you have, and these days you can think of these kind of East Asian cartoon traditions. Uh, there's some level of arbitrariness in the sign. Mane, for instance, this ooh thing, ooh. I don't understand this ooh business. Do you know UW?
Yes.
Now, in what way, shape, or form does that UWU? How is that like? I mean, I don't know. What is it even meant to convey? Like cuteness or something, right? Or what is it?
It means cuteness.
Yeah, like I
Kawaii
don't
in
get it.
Japanese.
I just don't get it. What is the link between signify and signified? It's very arbitrary. Unless you can explain to me. I mean, what is that what is it? Is it meant to look like a face?
Smile.
It's kind of like a smiley, an emoji.
What?
And it's
The curved lips.
the
When
curved lips and
It's
expressing too
actually
much
no, it's
cuteness.
actually in the context of India or any other Western country per se taking up the kawaii fashion of Japan, it really makes no
Exactly.
sense. But for Japan, the kawaii culture actually came from a resistance that the imperial, like the post-imperial Japanese, they tried to condemn people for not for following the government, but these people, they kind of took the kawaii business in their hand, like, no, I will use pink and fluffy pens as stationaries and be what I want to be. So this quote unquote loudness of personality was like a resistance to the gloominess of the empire.
I see.
uh,
I see. I see. Very
and
interesting.
From there, I guess right now it's absolutely over the top, so many people do criticize about it, but I personally feel that taking certain emojis out of context does make no sense, but in their country it has like immense significance.
Okay, no, okay, I granted, and thanks for that, Kuhan. It's very interesting. But the kind of point that I'm getting at is that even in things like emojis, even in mime, there will be some level of arbitrariness, all right? Ektukhani, you need a bit of cultural familiarity to get it, right? If I went to a village somewhere in, I don't know, West Bengal, and I showed them oo, I don't know if they would understand oo. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to say. So there's some degree of kind of ambiguity or arbitrariness there, which wrestling is, wrestling is even more transparent. The suffering is just very obvious suffering. Okay, and that's enough. This has become a very long recording. I won't be able to upload it. It's 11:30. Okay, Cholo. Any questions at this point? Otherwise, let me stop recording.